Right, so my name is Cody Smith. I am a program coordinator for career and professional development, and this is the first Skillshop in our spring 2022 series, talking about remote work and the new norm in the workplace. So what are some of the major challenges that remote work can cause in a working place? In a couple different articles, they mentioned social isolation, team building, trust, collaboration, and tonal miscues being the root of a lot of the challenges and issues that pop up in a remote work setting. But what do all of these different issues have in common? What's the major theme behind all of these? And really, the majority of these issues go back to communication. Refining your communication skills in a remote work setting is critical to the success of it and the company around it. Social isolation, team building, trust, collaboration, and tonal miscues can all be avoided with some excelled communication and communication practices. So today, we're first going to go over some tips and tricks about how to combat these communication issues. And then we also have a generous panel of alumni that are willing to talk to us about some of their remote and hybrid work settings and what they do to combat these issues and others as well. So we're going to start by talking about how to build some virtual spaces in a remote work setting. And really, this kind of starts with using the technology that's provided by the remote work location. You can do this and build these virtual spaces for you to connect with coworkers. One interesting way to try this out is to organize a recurring Zoom room to hold lunch breaks. You can have an ability to connect with lunchtime conversation from anywhere that you are that you may miss out on in a remote work setting. You can also create a space or even an email chain for coworkers to share good news about their work or personal lives, or just something uplifting that they saw on the internet or on TV. You can also hold virtual group sessions to connect everyone. For example, you could hold a weekly Monday morning meditation for everyone to reflect and prepare as they go forward. And finally, emails can take a long time from sending to receiving. So maybe you could try remote co-working, where you work with their coworker as a Zoom conference room, and you can have that small talk that you would normally have with them while still collaboratively working on whatever project you have. So next, we're going to talk about communication details. And what I really mean by this is one way that trust can be eliminated is through clear, reliable, and frequent communication. A good place to start is to ask your team and/or your supervisor what is their preferred method of communication. In today's world, email, instant messaging, whether it be Teams or Slack, are very common. Phone calls are a little bit less common now, but they are still very relevant, and Zoom calls have kind of taken over in this world too. And asking these preferred methods of communication can be especially helpful if there are generational differences among your team to figure out those preferred lines of communication. Another good thing to iron out with your team is how often they'd like you to check in with them, whether it be on projects or just on day-to-day tasks, whether this be weekly, bi-weekly, or just as needed whenever you run into issues. In doing this, you're able to check in conveniently with the rest of your team and also able to alleviate some concerns that they may have thinking that you're struggling with something. And it also eliminates some of that overbearing micromanaging because you have those set standard check-in times. If you're also working on a solo project or task, it can be helpful to do coordinated project or task check-in meetings in order to make sure that everything is still up to snuff and get group opinions on updates and different tasks. So next, we'll talk about utilizing all the provided technology. Like I mentioned before, in a remote work world, utilizing the technology that you're given is a key factor in making sure the team works cohesively. Technology can help us maintain a group feeling of collaboration, and technologies like Google Drives can allow multiple people to work on a project at once, allowing them to be able to collaborate together. Other technologies like Microsoft Teams can allow the same level of collaboration, but also introduces video calls, audio calls, instant messaging, and document sharing as well. With these functions, you can kind of bring them together as a team and allow that high level of collaboration, but from anywhere. Tone mindfulness is another really important thing when remote working. Harsh tones, whether perceived or real, can divide a workplace and really eliminate a level of productivity. Tonal miscues are not a new thing. They've always been around in workspaces, but with increased frequency of virtual communication, the problem has only gotten worse without that face-to-face contact. If you're anything like me, text communication can be a little bit nerve-wracking at work because you don't have that tone or facial expressions to really work with to get your message across. Your coworkers can read something one way when you completely mean it a different. So "we missed you today" can turn into a much more stern and negative connotation versus "we missed you today." I used to use exclamation marks a lot as an indicator of my tone in emails and messaging, but Grammarly has come out with a new free download that you can use as an internet plugin or email plugin that does tell you the tone of your messages, whether it be stern, passive aggressive, friendly. So you can use that. Like I said, it's free and it plugs into your internet browser or your email for you to be able to use it. It's linked there, so if you would like to check it out later, it's a pretty simple URL. All right, and so I know that most people did not come here to listen to me talk, so I do want to go ahead and introduce our panelists. We do have 4 alumni joining us today. We have Ron Miller, who is the principal of Reliant Energy Solutions. We have Robert Hanley, who is the vice president for cyber solutions and engineering, as well as recruiting for Sabre Systems. We have Jason Cecil, who is a CDC public health analyst. And we have Caitlin Johnson, who is director of alumni engagement at the Stephen M. Ross School of Business with the University of Michigan. So I'm going to go ahead and stop sharing my screen so that we can see everyone together and talk to these alumni. We do have a couple questions set up for you all already. So I just want to go ahead and start with introductions. So that can be name, graduation year if you choose to include it, role in company again, and then how long you've been remote or hybrid. And Jason, you're first on my screen, so I'm going to go ahead and start with you.
Great. My name is Jason Cecil. I graduated in 1997. I am a public health analyst at CDC, been there for 20 years now. And we have been remote. We've been 100% remote and we remain remote. It's been almost 2 years exactly. Next month, it'll be 2 years. We were supposed to come back starting last month, but Omicron happened. And so now it's anybody's guess when we will actually return to the office.
Awesome. And then Caitlin, I have you next. So if you want to go ahead.
Hi, good evening, everyone. Again, Caitlin Johnson. I'm the Director of Alumni Engagement at Michigan Ross for the University of Michigan. I apologize. 2 children are running through the dining room. Welcome to the remote world. All right. I graduated with a hospitality and tourism management degree in 2009, and we went remote, obviously March 2020, and then this past fall, we returned to a hybrid experience so we could support the students at Michigan and kind of get back into the swing of things. So we're doing the interesting hybrid model and happy to share more about that later in the conversation.
Awesome. And then Ron, I have you next.
Yeah, Ron Miller, good to be on the call. Graduated from Virginia Tech in 1974 in civil engineering. And I've been in the energy field, so I'm doing independent energy and decarbonization consulting for my own company in the industrial and mining sector. So I've been remote about 7 years, and a lot of my clients are definitely not in the Denver area. So it's really been a way of life for me to really connect with people. And I'm kind of a real, say, cheerleader for remote. I like it a lot. So maybe prejudice in that favor. So that's me in a nutshell.
And then Bob.
Yes, greetings, Hokies. Yeah, I'm a 1979 graduate, aerospace and ocean engineering. Actually, before I came to work for Sabre, I worked for the Navy for 38 years. So I'll be able to give you a perspective of government telework and remote before and after COVID, as well as on the industry side. And I'm looking forward to it. So at Sabre, it's kind of a unique position for me because as Cody said, I'm VP of Cyber and Engineering, but I'm also VP of Recruiting. So I actually oversee the onboarding for people that we have, and we have a lot of remote onboards, et cetera. So I'll be able to share some of that as well.
Awesome. And so that kind of throws us into the first question here, which is, what does a regular day in your world look like as a remote or hybrid employee? I'm going to go ahead and just start with Bob since I got you going here.
Yeah, and I'm sure all the panel members will have similar stories on this. So our company did remote stuff because we have people in various locations. So we did Zoom calls, et cetera, for quite some time before COVID hit. COVID changed things up without a doubt. And so then we all had to work around different tools, whether it was Zoom or Teams or WebEx. And I only say that because there is no one universal tool. So working remote has been a challenge with different customers. So right now I have commercial customers, I have federal customers, and I have DoD customers, and I can't use the same tool with all three of them because they all have different security requirements. So DoD doesn't typically work well with Teams. If you have GCC High, they work better with WebEx and a little bit on Zoom. Sometimes they have to switch to their personal computers to have some of that. And even our commercial customers don't always have the same connectivity. So it's been a challenge on just figuring out which tool works best for which customer. And then, as you alluded to earlier, there's measures of productivity and how you do that. So measures of productivity have changed during COVID and remote work, and how you actually know how much work various people are doing. And then the other comment that I'll add is that is a challenge for remote work is people have lost a sense of when the day starts and when the day ends for people. And I'll say that in terms of a quality of work life and if you're in a different time zone, then that further exacerbates the problem. And what I mean by that is back in the days when you actually went into an office every day and you went home at night, if you went by somebody's office, let's say I went by Caitlin's office and I said, hey, is Caitlin here? She's gone for the day. Oh, okay, I'll catch up with her tomorrow. Well, there isn't any of that in the remote work. People just assume you're always online. And all those hours that you used to commute, people think you're working now. So the day has actually gotten longer and more of a challenge, to work around. And so personal time management, quality of work life has definitely changed. So those are just some quick thoughts.
Yep. And we will definitely touch on work-life balance a little bit later. But Ron, what does a normal day in your world as a hybrid employee or a remote employee look like? Oh, Ron, I think you're on mute.
Actually, yeah, you're still on mute is still the operative word, I think. So I just walked right into that one. But anyway, I think it's connecting with teammates, clients via WebEx, using SharePoint. I think using common file storage facilities to, help facilitate communication and sharing of information. I think one thing in the remote world that's really important is over communicating, just like Bob had mentioned. You really depend on seeing people on video, listening to what they're saying, what they're intimating as tip-offs versus being in a room with the same people. I think another deal about remote is initiating conversations and key strategic questions. Don't be afraid to speak up, and I say challenge, meaning, hey, have you thought of this? What do you think about this idea? Because I think it's really more important to draw people out when it's remote versus the normal dynamics in a meeting in a conference room. I think that's really key. The other thing is always asking meeting participants to turn the video on, because I think some people may block that out and say, "Oh, I'm really not dressed appropriately," or it's oh, dark 30. I want to be heard, not seen. But I think with remote work, you really judge so much from what you see and hear. But if you can't see people's how they imply things in their discussion, you miss part of that idea that they're trying to share with you. So I think that's ultra important, and that's some of the highlights on remote for me.
Awesome. And we'll definitely talk on some of that professionalism aspects a little bit later on as well. Caitlin, it looks like you have a co-host now, but what does a normal day in your remote or hybrid world look like?
I don't know if there's a normal day recently, but so we kind of have a general schedule of when people are in the office and when we're remote. So you can check and see, like, who am I going to be in with today? Or how should I be connecting with Ron? Because I know we have a meeting. I'm just not sure if we're doing it virtual or in person. So a lot of times GChat is popular for us to use. And I usually ask, my coworkers and people who I communicate the most with, how do you like to communicate in this space? Are you good with GChat? Typically I say, GChat me, but sometimes I might just say, hey, are you there? I need to call you because I'd rather just talk this through than try to write a story into GChat. So it's a little bit of everything. I also make sure that I kind of block time out for me to get stuff done so that people can't book over your schedule, your time fully. So you have time to focus on some of the key projects that you're working on. And then other than that, I think just atmosphere wise, make sure you're in a good spot where you can focus on your work, not like this. And so I actually enjoy going back into the office just because it has that work atmosphere, less distractions for me, and all of that. So that's kind of like a snapshot of what the week looks like.
Yeah, it is nice. I know that's one thing that our office utilizes, is blocking that time for your own projects, work, whatever you need to do is a big piece of what we do. And then Jason, what's a normal day in your remote or hybrid world look like?
Well, it's shifted a little bit. I usually, because I don't have a commute anymore, I now, basically sign on about 7 a.m. and then, you work through the day and get off at like 3:30, 4 o'clock, depending on what's going on. Sometimes it's later. I work in global immunizations. So we do have time zone differences that have to be accounted for. So sometimes you end up having very early morning or very late in the day calls, depending on where you're trying to meet. CDC had to really ramp up its rollout of technology. They had long been slowly adding different things to our technology capabilities, but that had to go into warp speed when we went fully remote. And luckily they had the infrastructure to do that. Like for instance, the first thing they got was managers were given Zoom accounts so they could set up Zoom meetings. But now I see that we more often will shift, we've shifted onto Teams. But that's very much an agency thing, because I noticed too that, I work a lot with USAID, and they use Google Meet, which our folks don't like us to use. They don't like us to use Google Drives or anything like that, although we do have some workarounds that we can share files with outsiders. The environment, the working environments become a lot more locked down as far as sharing of files and things like that. Like now we have SharePoint to the degree that like we can designate the security of individual files so that people can't forward or share them if you, unless you've given permission to do it, if you own the document. The blocking of personal time so that you can't just be wall-to-wall meetings is also something that's been pretty important.
Awesome. And so that piece there kind of leads us into this next one. I'll start with Ron this time. What does your work team or work community look like, and what efforts has your company taken to make sure that this stays strong, even though everyone's kind of spread out?
I think the real key is, you mentioned it earlier, it was regular team meetings on a certain cadence of the frequency that they happen, blocking out a certain time, a half hour, an hour, each week or bi-weekly or each month, just to make sure that you're very regular. And you mentioned it in a project context, but I think it's really important for people to feel like they're going to stay on target, stay on schedule. Don't let the team down by having this regular team meeting. I really believe in having agendas, going through an action item from the last meeting, a to-do list at the close. I think it's really important that without being too ultra structured and ultra, that way. But I think it's especially for a project, it's really important to be very disciplined and set up some structure so that you know where you are, you know where your gaps are, and you can address those. And I think the other thing is to be aware of time zone differences. From my work, I work not only with Africa, but also Australia. So there's some wide timing. And I think setting up times that think about the other people on the call, and as far as what would be a convenient time for most people. It could be a very early call in Denver, but it could be less invasive for other people in different time zones. And I think that's on a global scale, which we're getting more and more that way in business. I think being respectful of their times, and if one meeting is really bad for one group, well, rotate the inconvenience through different meetings, different times. So try to be polite but kind to all of your meeting participants.
And Bob, what does your work team or community look like, and how has your company taken those steps to make sure it stays strong?
Yeah, so that's a challenging question. So the way we're set up, we have offices in multiple locations around the country. Most of our work is in the DoD sector, but we also have federal and we also have commercial work. And so that makes for an interesting dynamic, because as everybody on this call knows, on the business end, hiring people is a lot more challenging these days because people now want to work remote. And so for our defense sector work, that creates a challenge because there is secure work that actually requires being in a secure facility, and you can't do that remote. But back to the original question, I have some people that we've hired that are just one person sitting in Atlanta, Georgia, and that's where they work. And sometimes they jump companies, and this time they jump to our company to work there. Other people are actually working on contracts specific to a location, whether it's in Huntsville or up in Philadelphia or down here in the DC area, which is where I am. And so they're in a remote hybrid work, and those rules fluctuate, as people on the call talked about. So if you're in DoD in certain sectors, they have certain rules, masks on, COVID vax. If you're in the commercial sector, it's a little bit different on those rules, et cetera. And so the challenge is, as the people get into this remote hybrid situation, and I was just talking to two of my folks that are down in Huntsville and asked them this very question, unrelated to knowing that this was going to be a question here. And the response back, because I asked them the question, how connected do you feel to Sabre Systems, my company sitting down there? And the answer I got back was, well, sometimes I feel connected because there are a lot of good communications that come out, but on other times I feel like I'm not part of the bigger Sabre corporation because I'm out on an island here. And so that becomes a challenge for all of us on this call is, how do you get the people to feel that they're just not sitting on an island somewhere and they're really part of the company? So what we do is now we have town halls that we run monthly, and we bring so my whole team that does cyber and engineering will come on the call, regardless of where they are in the country. And we'll spotlight different people on the call and some of the accomplishments that they've made and some of the awards that they've made, et cetera. And then the other thing we did is we set up communities of practice for all of our 6 business sectors that is a place where anybody on the team can go and find out information of what we're doing, federal, commercial, or DoD. So I think that's a good thing to do. And I'm sure everybody else on this call is doing similar things, but the more you can communicate, the better it is. And the more, I think, in touch you'll be with the employees. And turning on the cameras is great. As everybody on this call also knows, and you can see not everybody has their cameras on. That's a variable. Some people like being on camera, some people don't. I always go on camera. I don't care what I look like. Other people are just like you said, Ron. It's like, hey, it's so dark 30. I'm not going on a call right now. And then, just like Caitlin, we have people where cats are walking across their computers and dogs are barking in the background and DirecTV shows up to do work. And you have to work around that stuff as well. So anyway, sorry for the long answer.
Yeah, no. And Jason, I'm sure that you all have being global reaching with your efforts and stuff. I'm sure that you all have some similar issues as well. What does your company or community look like, and what efforts have they made to make sure everything kind of stays strong?
Yeah, one of the benefits we had because we worked in international health is that we always had colleagues that were scattered all over the world. So that hasn't been a huge change. The biggest change has been those of us who have been at headquarters here in Atlanta. One of the things, I'm one of the few people in my division who is an extrovert. Most of our my colleagues are introverts by nature, and so they have loved being remote 100%. I've kind of missed it. I've gotten used to it. The camera thing makes me smile because we weren't quite sure what to do with it at first, and it turned out there was a union issue that was brought up, and so they made the rule that you could not be coerced into turning your camera on, and so what I find now is that most people, unless they're speaking, they generally have left their cameras off. It does miss something, especially with big announcements. Like we recently just had a new acting division director announced, and I was texting with my boss while it was going on, and both of us were like, oh, what we would give to be in the room, to be scanning people's faces right now. It definitely lacks a little something. To try to maintain community, it's been a challenge. A lot of you were talking about in the presentation about lunches. My team, there's only about 5 of us on my little policy and partnerships team. So, we've had regular lunches scheduled so that we could just sit and eat whatever we're eating and just talk about anything. And luckily, we built that kind of atmosphere before COVID, and we've tried to keep it up. I think my boss has done a lot of yeoman's work to really make sure people feel connected to the things that we're doing as a team, and to what's going on in our division and around the Center for Global Health. And it's not easy to continue on with the community that we've had. And I have no idea how we bring people on. I feel sorry for people that have I know there are people that have been onboarded during this time. I'm not sure how they have set it up because I haven't experienced it and I don't know anybody who directly was brought on new. But that's all I've got right now.
Yeah, and that's definitely an area that's, I think Bob mentioned it earlier, hiring and onboarding and stuff this time of, with everything going on has definitely been an issue. That's been a difficult one to tackle. Another field that has had a lot of issues with kind of remote work or hybrid work, or however you want to put it, is a lot of the higher education world. So Caitlin, what does your work community look like? As you mentioned, you were hybrid versus fully remote. And what efforts has your office taken to make sure that community stays strong?
Sure. So kind of opposite of Jason, a lot of my team, they're all extroverts, right? Because we're working with alumni, donors. We like to talk to people, see people. So within our team, in the beginning, we were trying a little bit of everything. We had Padlet pages where we would just say, hey, what recipes are you guys trying out right now, right? Just to get some of that personal aspect that you miss when you go into the break room and get coffee and check in on people. I know the business school at large tried, I think it's the Facebook like workplace. That's for some people it's not, but that's where you could share different events that were happening or just things that you thought would be helpful to connect with. And I think that kind of fizzled out. For our team and my team specifically, I meet with my employees once a week, some of them bi-weekly because we have a good cadence down and, it's an oiled machine. I've also onboarded 3 people / hybrid virtual. So that's been interesting and I can speak more to that. But we also liked to, when the weather was nice, right now we have about 8 to 10 inches of snow on the ground, but we'd go out, outdoors to eat for lunch if people were in the office. For our holiday party, we found a place that had outside heaters, bonfires, and just enjoyed each other's company all bundled up. So we try a few different things. And sometimes it's just sending a funny email, right? Like, you won't believe what happened today, or sharing kind of funny stories. So you all saw my kids screaming through the dining room, joining the conversation. I've been interviewing and blocking wooden blocks like this. It's just like, you wouldn't believe the stories you would be telling today of this is what happened at work today. And it was normal. So it's just a lot of remaining in contact with folks, remembering to ask about the personal, if that's your culture, and just being real with people. And yes, like Bob said, many cats have gone across laptops, dogs have joined in. So it's more of, I appreciate that people know that's normal as well, instead of like, oh my gosh, there's a kid in the screen, how dare you? So it's been an interesting ride for sure.
Yeah. Yeah, and like you have both mentioned, all those outside distractions, kind of, it's when we started, everyone would stop and, oh, look at your cat. And now it's very much, okay, Ron's got his cat on the screen again, And so that kind of brings in the next piece. And I noticed the chat's kind of talking about it a little bit too, but in the remote working world, what level of professionalism is still expected by your office or company? For example, is it still expected that you follow dress code? Do you have your cameras on for meetings? Are you allowed to have your, lunch or your snack with you? And so for that one, I'll go ahead, and I just saw Bob's message, so I'll hand it over to him first.
Yeah, so that's such a variable question, and it kind of gets into some of the things I just put in the chat, because it depends on the customer and depends on if it's just an internal company call where everybody kind of knows each other, even if they're remote in different locations. And it's like the 4 panel members here. If we were just on a call together, I wouldn't care, if your kids are on your lap, if you're eating or whatever, because, we know each other. But when we're on customer calls, the decorum is a little bit different. And it's typically driven by whoever the customer is, if you will, on the other end. So, when we're on calls with the government, half the time they can't even get in on videos. So nobody knows what they're doing. So most people kind of get off and just turn off video anyway. But if they're on video with an actual external customer, the decorum is you're probably not going to try to be eating in front of the customers. And you're probably going to be dressed good, at least from the waist up, as most people have, whatever is visible on the camera. So like I said, it's highly dependent on the specific customers you're working with and what you think their expectation is on the other end. I mean, I've been on calls with customers where they're laying in their bed like they just woke up with a laptop sitting on their lap, and it's like, hey, they're paying the bills, they can do whatever they want, but I wouldn't do that, And then the last comment I'll make is, because I mentioned that I have somebody in Atlanta, and I was onboarding him from Atlanta, and he's wearing a suit, and I was wearing a sweatshirt, but one of my dress Virginia Tech sweatshirts, not this one. And I said, Michael, you don't really have to get this dressed up for our calls with the company. And his answer was, which is probably applicable to everybody on this call, was, well, my whole wardrobe was built around pre-COVID. And I used to work in DC before I moved to Atlanta. So basically everything I have are sport coats, ties, and suits. And so I don't want them to go to waste. So I just wear them because that's what my basic wardrobe is, and so I get it. And I said, that's fine, but that's not the expectation on these calls. But I think you'll find a lot of that also is all of us on this call probably have come to the realization that we own way more clothes than we actually need in a COVID remote environment.
Yeah, and so Jason, I'll hand it over to you on this one too. You kind of touched on this a little bit before, but what level of professionalism is still expected by your office?
It depends on who you are talking to. For instance, I went and got a collared shirt for this thing today. Usually though, I'm wearing t-shirts and shorts. But if I'm speaking to or going to be in a meeting with higher level people, especially, then I'll have something nice on, at least in view of the camera. I haven't really worn a real pair of pants, for quite some time now, but I do have nice shirts, and I find that actually makes a difference in some productivity at times. Getting dressed, like actually having something you put on to sign on to work does help with productivity, I find, and getting into that mindset that you might have used the commute to kind of get into the work frame of mind, the work headspace, but putting on actual clothes that you work in, and it be different than what you went to bed in is essential, I think. We had a question about a specific workspace and things. CDC has had, the US government writ large has had the ability for telework at least since the Obama administration on a widespread basis. And I know at CDC they have. CDC was a little slow to adapt to this. And in fact, it's been a revelation for a lot of managers across the agency that work still gets done on time and well, even though everybody's working from their house. Because a lot of people thought, if I can't see you, you're goofing off. You're not doing real work. We still have deadlines, and we still have things that have to be done in a certain time, in a certain manner. And it's very obvious if you're able to do that or not. But our telework agreements kind of go through like standards for how our workspace is supposed to be set up. Not everybody has to have a dedicated office. I mean, we have to verify that, like we've got a chair that is ergonomically good and that we have a dedicated space with power and internet and that sort of thing. And oh, by the way, the government's not going to pay your personal internet bill. this is a benefit. It's not a thing, but they do also provide us with laptops and stuff like that. So, you know, the only thing I'm paying for is the power and the internet. But with the professionalism, you know, even my colleagues, you know, around the world, you know, most of them are working through WHO or a nonprofit like the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. You know, they kind of have the same public health culture, I like to call it. You know, the higher ups will be much more dressy, and they'll have that fancy CDC background that we can download if we want to. The one that I tend to use, people think it looks like a discotheque, but it makes them happy because it's kind of colorful. But you know, it's not much more formal or anything like that, and the camera usage varies as well. You know, definitely when we've interacted with people that are in a more higher security setting, certainly cameras are never on, although they can set up like Teams meetings, or even somehow the National Security Council has some Zoom stuff set up that they can do meetings that don't require a special compartment, what we call a SCIF. You guys who work with the Defense Department know what I'm talking about with a SCIF. But now I feel like I'm rambling, so I'm going to sign off on that.
Well, perfect. Thank you for the government side of things on that. Ron, I'm sure that you know, you probably have similar stories to Bob about different customers, and to Jason about different time zones and stuff. So what level of professionalism is still expected in your working world?
I think it's always important to be like civil, you know, kind to other people, just as you were in a meeting. But I think the one comment that you made earlier, Cody, was important, that like the inflections, the voice inflections, and especially facial expressions. You know, this is the next best thing to be in a meeting, but it's not perfect. It's better than email. It's better, not as good as, or better than a phone call. But I think just simple things of professionalism, of how you conduct a meeting, being open to people to interject. And I think one thing is maybe having a little pause after you speak. It's okay to have maybe a second or two of quiet to allow people to say, hey, I think he's finished. I'd like to interject or ask a question, rather than some meetings I've been in there. People are interjecting at all times over other people, and it's kind of confusing to hear who's on first. Which conversation are we really on right now? So I think that part is just a little bit of civility and respect for your other folks on. I think you mentioned about the shorts. I know one anecdotal story. My son's girlfriend was on a call, and you know, he walked by the door and he was just out of the shower. Fortunately, he was clothed. But her comments work people like, who was that? Well, that was Scott. Well, can he come back? So it was. I think she was not a rock star. She definitely did not want to intimate he was a rock star, but it made the interesting meeting more interesting. But I don't think he's done that since. Part of it is accidental. Part of it is prankster that he has ingrained in him. But other than that, I just think some of these things are things that we would normally do in a meeting. You know, just be open to people interjecting, questioning, challenging, all positive with positive intent. So I think that's enough for me. But back to you, Cody.
Well, thank you for that, Ron. And then Caitlin, what sort of professionalism standards still surround virtual meeting spaces for you all?
Sure. So I think Jason said it, you know, it depends on who you're chatting with. And I don't interact with students a lot, so I actually don't know if I can guess that you guys are able to be a little more lax in classes. Hopefully you're back in them though now, at least in person. And I always have something that I feel like if I had a pop-up meeting with a faculty member or an alum, like I felt good about it and didn't have to be like, oh my gosh, I look crazy, I didn't do XYZ. And like Jason said, you know, taking a shower, I always put lipstick on because it it looks better on screen. You feel like I'm not a girly girl whatsoever, and I usually don't do makeup, but that makes me look like, oh yeah, I'm ready. And so, yeah, for the most part, if it's a slow Friday, you know, I might be a little more comfortable and have a nicer sweater. If I'm talking to alums, sometimes I'll throw up like a background zoom of the business school, right? So it just has that like nostalgic feel. And they're like, oh, you're in the Winter Garden? I was like, no, but I feel like I am, don't you? And so it's just, you know, creating different atmospheres for the conversations you're having as well. You know, I see that Jason probably has a nice lighting system for his conversations, right? You can tell that mine is not great in the basement. So if you are talking with folks a lot, sometimes you'll have those nice halo lights, which I should invest in. I blur out the back because this is an ever-changing scene back here. I wish I had Ron's background that's legit. So, you know, just sometimes it's a little fun too. So that's another way actually real quick to engage our staff is if we're having celebratory things, we all throw up kind of fun backgrounds, right? If it's someone's birthday and they're not expecting like everyone to have balloons in the background, it's just another fun way to spice it up a little bit.
Awesome.
Hey, Cody, if you don't mind, could I just jump in and make one comment? Because Caitlin just reminded me of this. So when you're talking about, you know, protocols and things like that, you would think 2 years into being in virtual meetings, that people would understand the basic decorums. And just like we said at the beginning of the call, you know, still the catchphrase is, hey, you're on mute. But so I can't tell you how many meetings I've been on. And I actually ran a cyber webinar and we had 250 guests on the call. And people like just didn't get it. You know, I kept having to hit, you know, mass mute for everybody because people would be off mute and you hear like, yeah, I'll be there in a minute, you know, and all this stuff. You know, so people still to this day just don't understand some of those business protocols and pay attention, whether it's camera on, camera off, or, you know, they're muted or not muted of things that are going on and how it can distract from the meeting and sometimes in very negative ways.
Yeah. Yeah, it still is definitely a work in progress, even though our progress has taken quite a while to get to where we are. But that is the last question that we're going to do today. I want to thank you all for joining us and being able to share your experiences with everyone who was able to make it today. I'm going to go ahead and just share my screen for one last second here to go over a couple last minute things. So we do have some more upcoming skill shops for this semester. You can check those out on the Handshake and register there as well. The next one is going to be about how to use your strengths to effectively communicate. And we will be doing that with our team. And then I do want to invite the students to check out the Student Internship and Co-op Network. It is for any undergraduate student from any major who is looking for an internship, co-op, or any sort of experience. We'll be helping out with different information and updates about internships and co-op opportunities. We'll have special VIP programs and events for different network members. And we'll also be able to work with creating resume books for employers for those different opportunities. So you can either scan the QR code here to learn more about it, or if you go to Handshake, you can just search Join Student Internship and Co-op Network 2022, and you're able to subscribe or unsubscribe at any time. So like I said, I just want to thank everyone, and I'm going to go ahead and end the recording now. So if you all would like to stay on for any more questions, I would be